The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
Sidney Crosby is staying in Pittsburgh. The longtime captain has re-signed a 2-year contract extension with an annual average value of, well, you guessed it, $8.7 million. That's the AAV he's known all of his life, post entry level contract. So yeah, what do we think of this deal? It's not a surprise for us at this point. I know the last episode I said, hey, you know what? I see him staying. It looked more and more like a possibility. He said he was optimistic, Sidney Crosby that is, about staying in Pittsburgh. What do we think of this deal?
The number jumps out to me because it really speaks to why Sidney Crosby is one of one, why there isn't another quite like him. Certainly, you know, his career will frame the entire salary cap era, and the fact that he's been willing to play on the same number for 19 seasons, it will be in total, has given the Penguins to this point already tons of flexibility to build a team around him. Certainly, as we cast out now, he signed, you know, for this year plus 2 more at that same number, while the cap is rising significantly. I mean, his agents could even convince him to take $9.87 million or $10.87 million. I mean, if he wanted to keep the 8.7 in there, I think everyone understands that, being as superstitious as he is. But, you know, it was Sidney Crosby himself that insisted on that contract number. You know, he's leaving 40% on the table anyway, I'm guessing, from, you know, player coming off a couple 90-point seasons, even at his age. You know, really, I think any number that he wanted could have been justified, but it's yet more, I guess, one act of selflessness. And you might say, well, what's money? He's made all this money. But, you know, a lot of players around the league, and I don't say this is a bad shot at them, the money isn't necessarily the money. It's what it means, what it represents. But he's always done things in this way. I think that his career will go down as being the ultimate winner. And now there's a whole lot of pressure, I think, immediately shifted. I'm not saying it hasn't already been there, but pretty clearly shifted to the Penguins front office to give him a chance to win here while they've got him under contract now for 3 more seasons.
So how much does this allow them to succeed in that front? How much flexibility does it actually give them?
Well, unless he gave them a time machine as well, it's going to be tough. I mean, let's call it as it is. The most impactful players on the roster are Sidney Crosby's age or even older. And so, you know, I don't know what kind of miracles can be worked, but I mean, it gives you a chance, you know, especially if Crosby can stay in the form we've seen from him in the last year or two, which, you know, again, isn't a foregone conclusion. Every player ages. Every player gets to a point where maybe physically, whatever it is, can't keep up. And so it's hard to say, but, you know, he's at least given them some certainty here too. He's given them a chance to, you know that they have him signed at that number and not have as much trouble. I mean, if he'd have taken 12 million, for example, or 13 million, I mean, that's another player, right? Between the delta between what he could have been making starting in the 25-26 season and what he's going to be taking at 8.7. So I don't think it could be overstated. I mean, on this deal, but even frankly, and just what he's played on, you know, the 5-year deal he signed at a venture level, then a 12-year contract, now this 2-year extension, all at the same cap hit, is outrageous. I mean, probably is not a stretch to say he could have made almost 100 million more in that time. And, you know, I'm sure he doesn't care about that. What he cares about, obviously, is what he's always cared about, is trying to help his team win. And, you know, a truly special guy. I mean, what a drama this was. And then such an anti sort of climactic ending in a sense. I mean, it's very Crosby all around that this went on all summer. I know there were talks in June between his agent and the Penguins about an extension, you know, a little bit of dialogue as the summer went along, and ultimately, you know, it got finished on Sunday night, the deal itself. But, you know, ends at I guess a predictable number in some ways. But, you know, I must say I'm still a little surprised because, you know, some players look at it and say, I've been underpaid, and he's probably been underpaid, and yet still he's not, that's not what's important to Sidney Crosby.
So why did it take all summer? What was the holdup in all of this?
It came down to how long he wanted to sign for. I think that really was the issue here, is Sidney just, you know, getting comfortable with what this next contract would be. Not again, not the financial end. It's pretty clear. There's probably others in his ear saying, hey, maybe you want to switch to number 15 for the last couple seasons or whatever. But, 8+7 didn't work for him. He wanted 8.7. As I said, 9.87 didn't work for him. 10.87 didn't work for him. He wanted the 8.7 he's been on. So it wasn't a question of money, but I think it really was, Crosby turned 37 at the beginning of August. So now he's signed basically through to his 40th birthday. His age 37 season, this one, age 38 and age 39 are under contract, and then he would turn 40. And so, I would suggest this is the window now. We're looking at one of the all-time greats has left to play. I mean, I suppose, of course, there's circumstances. Maybe he adds one more year beyond that or a couple more beyond that. But I mean, at this point in time, I think that's all we can count upon. Pittsburgh was willing to go to a 3-year deal, a 4-year deal. I think if Crosby wanted to get there on this contract, but he didn't want to do that. I think he's given this window of commitment that he's willing to give it all to play in that period of time. And I think that's really what most of what took the time. Again, pretty unusual set of negotiations. I know later in the show, we're going to talk about the restricted free agents. I mean, there's different dynamics there where each side is trying to keep the other as low as possible, or if you're a player, get it as high as possible. This is a different scenario. This was all about Crosby, deciding what his future was going to be. And part of that future, as it turns out, is it going to be in Pittsburgh, but it was just how long does he want to keep playing for? And so we got 3 more years. Let's hope that everything goes well to enjoy that. And the Penguins would have signed him longer, but this was what Sid felt comfortable with.
This sort of feels like this is just going to set him up to the end of his career. This year will be the last year of the deal he's on. Next year gets the first year of that extension and probably gets to play some Olympics time. And then the year after that, I look at 26-27 as a farewell tour. That's how I see it.
Right, unless there's something at that point in time compelling him back, and that's the unanswerable for anyone, including Sidney Crosby here today, is perhaps 26-27 goes so well either or both for him and the Penguins, and maybe their team is right on the cusp at that point in time, and he's compelled to come back for one more year. I mean that's what we'll all stay tuned for. But I'm with you. I don't think you can count on it being any longer than this. Playing in that next Olympics, I know is a big carrot for him. It's going to be hard. I think I still stick to a lot of the things I've said all along, is that the Penguins do have to build a team around him here that makes this interesting, that keeps the juices flowing. It would just be hard to imagine, they've missed the playoffs now 2 years in a row. What happens if he missed the playoffs 5 years in a row to end his career? I'm thinking of the worst case. I mean, that would be a difficult stretch to endure. And so I think that clearly they're going to do everything in their power to ensure that doesn't happen. And he'll do the same, as someone in the dressing room and on the ice, trying to make sure Pittsburgh takes a step forward after those last 2 seasons.
For those curious and haven't seen the details online, Puckpedia has the contract details. Year 1 of that extension, base salary at $780K and a $9 million signing bonus. Could you imagine having a $9 million signing bonus just shows up in your account?
No,
you're living.
I'll tell you, there are some players, Leon Draisaitl, Austin Matthews, some of these guys that have signed lately are getting $15+ million signing bonuses.
That is true,
and it could have been $15 million for Sid too. I mean, I know it's all sort of play money when you don't have this isn't our reality, but he left money on the table here, man. It's the ultimate. Again, in a salary cap world, it matters so much because it's given Pittsburgh a lot of ability to build a team around them, and they have to do it again. But I don't think we should ever look past that. And I also, in the same breath, I'm not putting down any player that tries to get what he's absolutely worth. Because on the other end of the ledger here, I think you can argue easily that Connor McDavid's worth $20+ million a year. Matthews, McKinnon. I mean, these top guys in the league, if you don't have them, you can't win. And there's not very many of them. So, but I think we should celebrate Crosby for being a team first guy as much as, man, his accountant might not be loving all that.
Hold that thought, because I have a question about that. So yes, year 1 of that deal, $780K is a base salary, $9 million signing bonus. Year 2, $1.09 million salary base, and a signing bonus of $6.53 million. Thank you to our friends at Puckpedia for that. Okay, the idea that Sidney Crosby takes a very team-friendly deal because he insists on that 8.7 mil, and you've kept saying it, not 9.87, not 10.87. I've seen it already online. Fans from other fan bases being like, well, why can't my superstar player be as team-friendly? Why does he have to want so much money, blah, 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 blah. Do you think Sidney Crosby signing an extension like this and agreeing to the number that he did, do you see that having an impact on other star players going forward? Where if they obviously want the money that they want, a GM could push back and be like, well, Sidney Crosby did this. Do you think that has any bearing on future negotiations for other players?
I believe a GM might say that. I just think depending on the player or his agent, probably isn't going to change anything. You know, I mean, the reality is because stars are so rare, because they're so important, the stars sign their own deals. You know, the same thing happened when Leon Draisaitl got to his deal with Edmonton. I mean, there's only so much the Oilers can do. Obviously, they make a pitch. They're talking about building the team out around him. But, you know, if he wants 14 million times 8, guess what? That's what he got with maximum signing bonuses and full no movement clauses. And you know, the absolute game-breaking players are going to drive their own negotiations. They're going to make their own decision, what's best for them, for their families. They're going to do what they think is right. And so I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution. But I'm just pointing out that this one particular player who was the best of his generation made that choice again and again to find a number that he was comfortable with and that the team could work with. And that's part of what's helped set Pittsburgh apart. Let's call it. You know, I get why a player would want to raise. Look, when I do well at my job, I want to raise. I don't think there's nothing bad about saying that, but it's just in a fixed cap system that isn't always beneficial to the environment. And, you know, if Crosby was another person, he might have been leaving Pittsburgh by this deal. Do you know what I mean? He might have been saying, I'm going to go for greener pastures. He might have been asking for 15 million and credibly doing so. But he's him. This is who he is. This is who he's always been. He's been very true to himself. He's been true to the Penguins. They're lucky he wasn't born, even August 9th. They would have had to pay him $88.9 million all these years. Or January 5th, they would have been $15 million maybe all these years. But, you know.
September 16th, you're getting paid $9.16.
Exactly. So, 8787 was lucky for Sid, and was lucky for the Penguins too.
Anything else you want to add about Sidney Crosby before we finally put a bow on this long-running saga of where Sidney Crosby will continue his career?
Nothing on that, but I will say we did record an earlier episode, and so if something is a little bit choppy later on, this was an add-on to what we originally recorded.
I'll say this. The Dangle curse is a thing. The CJ Show curse is not a thing. It has happened more than once where we have recorded an episode and then immediately after we finish recording, a big story drops, and then we're able to come back and add this in. It has happened more than once, and I'm happy that that tradition continues on the CJ Show. Friends don't let friends overpay for wireless. Say bye-bye to your overpriced wireless plan and switch to Mint Mobile. Mint Mobile is here to help you and your squad with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network, and you can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Ditch overpriced wireless with Mint Mobile's deal and get 3 months of premium wireless service for $15 a month. And to get this new customer offer, all you have to do is go to mintmobile.com/Johnston. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/Johnston. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to about $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. NHL training camps open this week, CJ. I bet you're excited. You're as excited as I am, right?
I am. On Wednesday, I will be down for the opening of Maple Leafs training camp. And yeah, this is where it starts to feel real, right? It's we've been talking about the start of the thing for a while now. Now it's really, we're going to start learning what's going on in the league. Obviously there'll be developments injuries, trades, a few contracts still to sign. And then before you know it, we'll be talking about the start of the regular season.
Oh, for sure. We can only cover so much ground in person. Obviously, you being in Toronto, me being in Calgary. That being said, your job obviously is to have some kind of eye around the league. Are you able to give me maybe 5 storylines you're looking for around the NHL as training camps start? Give me 5.
I can. I mean, you gave me this homework assignment over the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not as easy as it would sound, because let me preface this the right way. What is training camp by definition? It's the period of time where teams and players get themselves ready for the real season, which begins in October. And so maybe as a grizzled member of the media corps, sometimes the whole hype up for camp stories, can be tough. But that being said, the more I thought about it, between watching my Dallas Cowboys take a real crap kicking on Sunday afternoon,
We'll get to that.
I did arrive at, I think some things that made me satisfy the criteria. And the first storyline or that is probably most burning on my mind, pursuant to camps, is what's going to happen in the Vancouver Canucks goaltending situation. And, I don't know that alarm bells need to go off yet. There certainly seems to be, I think there's some hopeful conversation around where Thatcher Demko's at as he recovers from injury. But, the fact remains, the number one goaltender for the Canucks ended last season sidelined by knee injury. And it doesn't seem as though there's a firm timeline on when we're going to see him on the ice to start camp, whether that's day 3, day 6, somewhere later. Obviously not optimal circumstances. And on top of that, Artur Silovs, the goalie who did play for the Canucks in the playoffs, had to miss some Olympic qualifying games for Latvia in the summertime. And so, I think that's a storyline, however it turns out, that I think is going to be very important for a team looking to build off such a great year last year. You don't want uncertainty at any position, but I think especially in goal, it can be something. I know there's been a bit of a dance with Kevin Lankinen, who at this point remains an unrestricted free agent, about maybe he goes to Vancouver and ends up as a depth option who might actually have to play some games depending on how the injury carousel swings. So I do think that what happens in Vancouver, specifically in net, in the coming 2.5, 3 weeks is pretty vital.
Okay. I like that opening. We can unpack that a little bit, but we should also mention the Canucks signed Dylan Ferguson to a PTO over the weekend as well. A really, really fascinating story, considering the progress they made last year, which Thatcher Demko is a huge part of. And for them to enter the season without both him and Artur Silovs, that puts so much pressure on everyone else on that team to get off to a good start.
Well, I caution about going too far. I mean, this is what we have to learn in camp. I mean, there's certainly I don't think it's a foregone conclusion they'll definitely enter the season without those guys, but how much workload they get, when they're on the ice, how they perform, if they are able to get into some preseason games. I mean, I think that's what makes it a good camp storyline. It's just basically, where are those players going to be at? And obviously on Wednesday when they meet the media, the team will probably give a little bit more, explanation on how they got here and where they're at. But I mean, really a lot of this has to play out on the ice. And so, there's a whole bunch of stuff in Vancouver. I mean, I don't know if you saw over the weekend, Antti Ranta spoke to a friend of mine, Sammy Hofren, longtime reporter who's based in Finland, and said he's going to continue his career in Europe, but that he did acknowledge that he had talks with the Canucks about, maybe attending camp with them. Also the Toronto Maple Leafs among the teams that reached out to Antti Ranta over the summertime. And so obviously the Canucks for some time here have been at least, trying to get as many veteran options lined up, try to, I guess, ensure yourself as much as you can. But let's not get around this. I mean, this is really a storyline about Thatcher Demko, because, how good he can be when he's at his best. The fact that, he's definitely had some injury issues over time. I think this one isn't necessarily directly related to anything that he's dealt with in the past, but, this is a season with big expectations in Vancouver. And, if you're talking about missing potentially one of your primetime players, you're just being uncertain about what you're going to get from that player. I mean, I think that story starts right the minute. I mean, it's already started, but it really starts the minute camp starts. The clock begins on it, and you're seeing, where Demko's at and if he's going to be able to play games and at what level.
I wonder if Vancouver, if it's too late for them to talk to the New York Islanders about Keith Kincaid, who was on their rookie roster announced a couple days ago.
I saw that. I should have looked in. Did he ever play, in the rookie tournaments? Or
I don't know exactly if he did, honestly. I just saw that he was on the roster, and it was just really, you don't see that all the time, where you see an actual veteran player, especially if Keith Kincaid, who's bounced around the league as much as he has.
Man, he's been
roster.
playing
That was an interesting
pro hockey
story.
for like more than a decade.
Yes. Like he was in the Canadiens organization. I remember those days. I remember that. I remember the Keith Kincaid era in Montreal. That was really weird.
Well,
anyway,
I mean, it's on brand, right? I mean,
yes, yeah.
The
Islanders,
Islanders,
all the emojis he would post. Yeah. Also
I was thinking more that the Islanders just have a very unique way of operating, and so
yes,
they do things their own way. That's not a shot. It's a fact. You remember they would sign players to contracts but not announce them for months.
The contracts left on the table for how many weeks, and then you're like, oh yeah, now you know their terms. Anyway,
there's always an air of what little mystery sprinkled in there from the Islanders.
Keith Kincaid, part of the weirdness.
It does underscore though one thing, and I hate to be a hater on the rookie tournaments because I know it's exciting, especially if your team has a top tier prospect and you're seeing that player in the sweater. That's exciting, and I don't want to hate on it, but the point is it's really hard to judge talent in the rookie tournaments because it is such a mixed bag what teams send, in terms of there can be a real range of quality in those tournaments. It's not necessarily apples to apples when you see the young Sharks against the young Kings. It doesn't always mean that. It's hard to know what you're measuring, I guess is what I'm saying. Including when a 35-year-old goalie might appear in one end too. I mean,
you're breaking a lot of people's hearts. A lot of people love watching the rookie tournaments.
Well, and they should, because I'm not hating on seeing, your favorite new young prospect do something and being excited about it. But it must be a tough scouting environment. I have a few scouts that I speak to. I know that travel to some of those tournaments. I should follow up and hear what their takeaways were. But again, you're not comparing. It's not like a true best on best of any best, if you know what I'm saying.
Very fair. Do you have another storyline for us? You have one, you have 4 to go.
Well, let's start where we just finished. I mean, I think the September sweethearts, we'll call them, the young players, the teenagers trying to crack rosters around the league. I mean, I think that's truly that's always a fun training camp story. And I don't think there's any mystery this year. Macklin Celebrini, the first overall pick for the Sharks, I believe the team has said right from the second they drafted him that he was going to be in the NHL this season. Sometimes there's a little bit of even if it's a smokescreen, I got to earn my spot on a team. Let's see how camp goes. I don't know that there's that with him. It doesn't appear that way. But there's lots of intriguing young players around the league, and there's going to be some surprises probably. Is there anyone else from that draft class that cracks a roster out of camp? Some of the young players, Lane Hudson with the Canadiens, Matvei Michkov with Philadelphia. I mean, I think that there's a number of sort of intriguing players that you just don't know to what degree are they going to make an impact. Are they going to stick around for 1 game, 5 games, 9 games, the whole season? I mean, I do think that the problem with this storyline is it's hard for me to identify one player because I think we're really talking about, it's going to be a group of 10 or 15, usually teenagers I'm talking about that crack rosters of NHL teams. And then of course we're watching game by game to see if they stick around because in some cases they only end up playing 1 or 2 or 3 games before being sent back. But those are probably the most fun stories every year. And I call them the September sweethearts because often the players that are just dominating the September preseason games, by the time the league gets turned up to November, it's difficult for them. And I don't mean to make light of it. It's just sometimes physically their bodies aren't as mature, even just mentally handling the situation they're in. Teams have cap considerations and rosters, things that, tied to the CBA that affects all that. But, no doubt there's going to be, Easton Cowan in Toronto as a teenager. There's going to be lots of talk around the Maple Leafs in the next few weeks about whether he should stick around. And as I say, I mean, sometimes it's a surprise. Sometimes it's a player who was selected like 15th in the most recent first round. There's not a lot of hype around them. And then all of a sudden they come to camp, they perform well, and they find themselves playing for real. You know, Matthew Poitras in Boston last year. So, you know, I think that's definitely where the most exciting stories generally come from in camp.
You mentioned Matvei Michkov in your answer. Did you see the video of him attempting the Michigan and heard everyone was laughing at John Tortorella for him trying?
Yes, I saw that on the weekend. And, you know, he's a player like that is even probably a higher level of intrigue because there's been so much mystery about him. You know, being a Russian, of course, you know, some teams in his draft year 2 years ago, 2023 draft, I think had some concerns or just unanswered questions. They weren't able to meet with him necessarily to the degree they would want, or, you know, watch his games and practices. He was playing in a remote part of Russia. You know, there's the conflict going on in Ukraine. I mean, did he want to play? Was he under contract? Would he ever come over? Well, I mean, here we are. He played one more year in Russia. Now he's signed with Philadelphia and, you know, appears set to make the Flyers roster. And so I think because there's been a lot of hype around him, he's very skilled forward, which is obviously pretty tantalizing. You can scour YouTube and find amazing clips, but I mean, that it's one thing to have that, and it's another to be a complete player or be someone that can play, you know, make an impact in the NHL. And so, you know, I think he'll be certainly one of those players. Like every preseason game, you're going to see it on social media. Whatever he does is going to be amplified, and that, you know, it should be. I mean, that, let's face it, there's a whole culture of the sport that loves the draft, loves prospects. And, you know, this is where you start to really get a feel for what they might be as NHLers. This isn't just a projection now. I mean, he's going to go play preseason games and play against, you know, established NHL veterans and try to show his best.
Okay, so the goaltending situation in Vancouver, the September Sweethearts, those are your first two storylines you're going to look out for at training camp. What's number 3?
I'm going to look down the highway from where I sit today at the Buffalo Sabres, and specifically the fact that Lindy Ruff is back as their head coach. And you know, it's tough to say how this will be a training camp storyline, but I think it is. You know, I don't know if you've seen, there's been a lot of discussion about renewed accountability in Buffalo about,
yes,
you know, obviously Lindy Ruff is a massive franchise icon for the Sabres. For anyone maybe a little younger, might not know this, he played for the Sabres. He was a captain of the Sabres. He was their most successful head coach, at least in recent memory, not excluding the Scotty Bowman era way back. But I mean, he took the team to Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final in 1999. They lost in triple overtime on a goal that probably shouldn't have counted under the rules at the time. But that's another matter now. But, you know, the team has enjoyed. He's been such a part of the fabric of the team, and frankly, there's a lot of good memories because those Sabres teams in, you know, 06, 07, I mean, really before they had this really long drought where they can't even sniff the playoffs, you know, they had a lot of good times with Lindy Ruff as a head coach. And so, you know, I'm just curious to see how that plays out, sort of the rhetoric maybe of their camp, you know, how because I think, quite frankly, Buffalo is just an incredible hockey market.
Mm-hmm.
It's a place unquestionably that loves the game and loves the team. But there's been a lot of reasons not to love the team for like whatever, it's 10 or 12 years. I mean, it's a long time. And so some of this, all that really matters is if this move makes a team better. Like ultimately they have to win for it to matter. But some of the hiring is unquestionably a little bit of PR, right? It's a little bit of getting some excitement back in the market. And so I think their training camp will be interesting to watch just because there'll be a sales element to it, I would think, from Lindy Ruff. And you know, the Sabres have so many talented players and you know, 2 years ago they did seem to be on the climb, and then last year didn't go quite as well. You know, that they need to win this season. And to me, it starts from day one of camp for a team like that that's got to find a way to, you know, put another 10 or 15 points in the bank. It's a big ask. But, you know, of all the offseason coaching changes, obviously what Craig Berube does in Toronto will get attention. You know, Sheldon Keefe's now in New Jersey. You know, there was a lot of turnover at that head coaching position. I think the most intriguing hire or the most interesting storyline arguably is Lindy Ruff returning to Buffalo, trying to get former glory. I say this as a proud Blue Jays fan. I remember they brought Cito Gaston back for a time. I mean, this is a thing pro sports organizations do, trying to recapture some of their old glory. It doesn't always work, quite frankly, but it has worked in some circumstances. And so it would be quite a story to me if Ruff comes back and actually, gets the Sabres to be playing the brand of hockey that puts them in a playoff race. I mean, the Atlantic Division's kind of been a logjam at the top, and those in the bottom half have had trouble breaking through. But it's going to happen eventually, and maybe it'll be the Sabres this year under Ruff. And I think their training camp and the way he's talking with the team, all the things he does, I think is going to will generate a lot of buzz.
13 consecutive seasons out of the playoffs for Buffalo.
Thanks for doing the math. I did homework, but I didn't actually look up the stat. I just know it's been a long damn time.
It's kind of funny considering you're way better at math than I am. I had to do the math. But also, I believe 6 coaches have come through Buffalo, thinking Ruff got fired, then Rolston, Nolan, then Bilesma, Phil Housley. Remember Ralph Kruger?
Yeah, I do.
Ralph,
of course.
Kruger?
Ralph's a great man.
And then Don Granato. And since then, yes, of course, no postseason time for the Sabres. A team that I know firsthand, I've said, hey, they're on the rise, they're going to make the playoffs, and other people around the league have done it. Like, I feel like if there's some patience wearing thin outside of Buffalo, in that city, it's up to 10 over there. Seeing the fans go off the way that they do, especially on social media, yeah, they've had it up to here with how their rebuild on top of a rebuild has been going. You need to see something at the end of the day.
They don't want promises anymore. I guess maybe that's part of the hard part of what I'm talking about, because this is a training camp story. All they can do is project forward to what they're going to do and establish this culture and standard. I mean, that's what every team says, but it won't matter at all if they're 3-7 out of the gate. It's going to be, some teams, there's a bit of I would say almost like a courtesy window into the regular season where, okay, if you start 5-5-1 and it's kind of mixed bag, like I think no one freaks out too much. I feel like a team like Buffalo, I would put Ottawa in the same group. Like, it's so important that they get a strong start and start, taking those steps right. They got to win people back. And I guess the beauty of this time of year is you can dream in any market. I mean, you can, maybe some of the teams, Carolina, Toronto, Edmonton, like the teams that have had really good teams, but, haven't been able to get to the cup. You start to dream of that at this time of year. And I think others that have been 13 years out of the playoffs are just imagine like, hey, we might get to March and have games that matter and the building's going to be full. And I mean, we could just list off the Sabres roster. They clearly have good players on the roster. Is it a perfect roster? Probably not, but very few in the league are. And I just think it's going to be, I think it'll be an interesting camp with that particular figure back in the fold and running the show.
One more thing before we get to topic 4. I've wondered this about the Sabres. I've also wondered this about the Ottawa Senators. You're right. They should be grouped in that same category because they're trying to essentially do the same thing. But the rest of the Atlantic Division, is it still too good for them to take that step? Just thinking about where Florida is, thinking about where Boston is, where maybe they do take a step back, but are they so bad where either Buffalo or Ottawa make that jump? Tampa Bay, they're kind of on their last legs, but they still made some additions that should still have them as a playoff team. Not to mention, they still have one of the best goalies in the world in Andrei Vasilevsky and Nikita Kucherov up front as well. Yes, they don't have Steven Stamkos anymore, but they still have some pieces in key places that should still keep them afloat. Like, there's some good teams in that division. Of course, the Toronto Maple Leafs, that should still be a playoff team in that division. So if you're Buffalo, if you're Ottawa, and you know what, we'll even consider Montreal in this too, because they want to take that step up this year. Like, how much progress can you actually make when the teams that have been making the playoffs year in, year out for the last handful of years are still playoff caliber teams?
You got to go there and be better than them. I mean, the one thing I'll say is sometimes the margin, it looks big. It's on paper at the start of the year, but sometimes injuries come along. Sometimes certain teams just don't quite gel in the way you might imagine. I mean, remember in this remarkable run that Tampa's been on, they did miss the playoffs one year in there.
They did.
And so my point is no team has won more than them, both in the regular season and in playoffs over the last, 10, 15 years. But they did have one season in the middle with this, like the roster they've largely been playing with, where they missed the playoffs by a point or two. And I think, if I recall correctly, injuries were a big part of that. They resisted doing anything rash, which turns out with hindsight to have been a good decision since they added 2 more Stanley Cups and another cup appearance since that point in time. I actually don't think the Lightning are in danger of falling off too much, though. I mean, absent, again, a crazy run of injuries or something happened that's unexpected. But to me, Andrei Vasilevsky is one of the more interesting players, entering the season, just because he clearly wasn't himself last year, was injured, recovering from an injury for the first couple months of the season, didn't reach his normal level. To me, if he gets back there, the Gensel acquisition, he doesn't mean spiritually what Steven Stamkos did to the Lightning, but he could do probably functionally a lot of what Stamkos did in terms of, putting up points, being a contributor on the power play for them. I do think that there's a sort of a hurdle of losing someone as important as Stamkos, but from a pure talent standpoint, I still think they're in a great spot to be a force. I mean, Florida, we'll see. I'm certainly not predicting they'll miss the playoffs. They just won the Stanley Cup, but coming off the short summer, having players again that are injured, for them, it's 2 straight short summers, of course, because they were in the Cup final 2 years ago when they lost to Vegas. Maybe they're due to have a bit of a drop off, not necessarily even a talent related one. Just, you can only play so much hockey. Can they slog it through another season? The Maple Leafs, there's questions in goal for them. Boston doesn't have its top goalie signed as of this moment in Jeremy Swayman. I know they made some pretty impactful signings, potentially, at least in the offseason, with Zadorov and Lindholm. But I guess there's no guarantees in the sport. And, as much as we don't see a ton of surprises, there are teams that jump up out, every couple of years, are a little more competitive than you think, or maybe a team that you thought was going to be strong falls off. And so I don't see an obvious path to answer your question with a lot of words, but I don't think it's impossible either to think that one of the teams that's been on the wrong side of the playoff ledger in the Atlantic sneaks in at the expense of one of the more established teams in the last 5 or 6 years.
Okay, so the Canucks goaltending situation, young prospects trying to make teams out of camp, and the Buffalo Sabres, 3 storylines Chris Johnston is looking out for. What's the 4th one?
Well, I guess I mentioned Swayman there. I mean, it's the restricted free agents, right, of which Jeremy Swayman is among the most prominent. As of this recording on Monday morning, now less than 48 hours until camp start, he's not signed a new deal with Boston. Seems pretty quiet in his situation. You've got Moritz Seider and Lucas Raymond in Detroit without deals. And the very, as I mentioned on the previous episode, the idea of, can they keep all those deals under $8.7 million, what Dylan Larkin, the captain of the team, makes if they're doing long-term contracts. You got Cole Perfetti in Winnipeg, who remains unsigned. All signs seem so positive there. He's, appearing here, there, and everywhere on behalf of the Jets, even without a contract. So, certainly not giving them tough love back. But, I think that I'll call these training camp storylines, because especially if we get to Wednesday and Thursday, and some or all those players aren't in camp, they've become pretty big day-by-day storylines in each of those markets. And so I'd say that's another important thing to keep an eye on in training camp week. It's too tough, even this close, to get too fired up, because I really do believe Wednesday is a deadline that'll push some action in some of those situations. But, not everybody's probably getting signed. I mean, it's fair. There's just enough RFAs out there. It kind of leads me to believe at least a few of them may miss a day or two of camp, and perhaps weeks, like that's happened in the past. So those will be notable storylines as we progress here.
Okay, so what about number 5?
I might have run out of steam at 4.
No. You're almost there, CJ. Big Money Siege. Give me something. I'll say this. The fact that Swayman and the Detroit RFAs, we've been basically, it feels as if every time we talk about them, at least the last few weeks, it's like this. How can I describe this as best as I can while sounding as eloquent as I can here? It's just like, hey, have they been signed? No? Okay. All right. Thanks. Bye. Like, what's going on here? I'm very curious at the fact that those specific 3 contracts have been, like, it's status quo on those situations.
Yeah, you got Dawson Mercer in New Jersey too. I think he will get done
yes.
on a short-term deal, but pretty good player. Player that when they've been involved in trade talks the last couple of years, other teams have wanted to be included in the package, and New Jersey's resisted. So, he's an important piece for them. Sometimes these are how negotiations unfold. I do think the deadline helps. It's hard because otherwise, when you get dug in, one side or the other kind of has to capitulate, I guess is one way to put it. We saw the Nick Robertson situation with the Leafs. It dragged on through the summer, and then it got to, a week or so ago. And I think he just decided it was best to lay down the sword. Like, what are we fighting for here? Maybe listen to some of all of us experts in the media saying, hey, just sign and play, man. You got a chance on this team. And so, he in a sense capitulated in that case. He decided that he didn't want to keep up the fight. And, some of that is the closer we get here, the players will be feeling pressure. The experienced GMs in these situations, I doubt Steve Yzerman's feeling pressure, for example. Like, I just think he's seen so much and been through so much as a longtime general manager and player in the league. He's probably not feeling pressure, but he understands, hey, there's probably pressure on those guys as they get closer to camp. They see their teammates getting back at it to just maybe take the best offer on the table. So that's what's going on. Is it's hard to handicap that all because, we're not in the middle of the negotiation, but it is a waiting game in a sense. But look, we're beyond that now. I mean, this is an important 48 hours for all those players to try to get signed and want to get to their new cities and, get the season started. I mean, this is the most exciting and best time of year. You don't want to be, squabbling over dollars at this point if you don't have to be.
Absolutely. So that fifth storyline, Toronto hasn't really come up yet. I know we'll get to them a little later, but is Columbus that fifth storyline? There are a few different possibilities for what that fifth storyline could be.
Yeah, it's tough. It's still a little tough to discuss the Columbus situation.
That's fair.
Just because, what are we going to say? Obviously, they're still feeling the weight of Johnny Gaudreau's death. And quite honestly, I don't know at what period we should say that they shouldn't be feeling grief is different for everyone. Obviously, it's some very, very close friends on that team. Mm-hmm. How even, just from a pure hockey standpoint, that they've been lost for a long time. They've got a new head coach and coaching staff with Dean Evison, their new general manager, and Don Waddell. There's just a lot of different dynamics there. And I think it's going to be a difficult year, but, they're going to try to band together and, put a good foot forward. So I don't know if I can make them the fifth storyline. Man, it's hard.
Absolutely. That's very fair. I wasn't even thinking when I mentioned Columbus. Well, it's a topic I put in our rundown just about the fact that, of course, they are trying to just add forwards and all that. But you're right. That idea but there's a lot of grief going through that locker room right now. That is a very good point.
Right. And it's going to be, when we talk about a training camp storyline, unfortunately, it's the biggest storyline in the sport right now. I think a lot of people are still processing what happened and trying to make any sense of it you can in any way you can. And obviously, as that team gets back together now, they were at the memorial last week for Johnny and Matthew Gaudreau, but a lot of the teammates were there, but then they're going to be gathered back in their dressing room and there's something big missing from their team, a big part of who they've been the last couple of seasons. So, that's probably the fifth storyline. It almost feels trite to say it because of the gravity of the situation, but I do think that the things they do will be, they're dealing with something that no other team in the league would ever want to consider having to think about. And so it's on a number of levels. I just think even the turmoil the organization was in beforehand, it's going to be a tough camp for them, I think, in a lot of ways. And maybe it's helpful in a strange sense to have fresh coaching staff, fresh GM, because I think can maybe take a fresh look at the entire situation. But, they're also in flux here too. They just signed James Van Riemsdyk to a new contract on Sunday night. He'd been someone that had actually been in discussions with other teams maybe about a tryout. But, I can see the wisdom in that. Really well thought of character, professional player. It's been around the league a long time. Columbus, should be said, had discussions with his agent way back into the summer, prior to the tragedy. So this isn't a direct reaction. One doesn't lead exactly to the other, but, obviously I think it's, having more veterans around can be helpful. And Van Riemsdyk, even at age 35, had a decent season for Boston last year. And I still think, especially on the power play, can put some goals in for them. And as I said, I think we'll bring some intangibles that will be very useful for Columbus this year.
At the risk of sounding like another podcast that likes to have thoughts on all these other teams, we should bring up Nashville as a possibility as well. We talk about teams gelling with the players that they add. I mean, Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, Brady Shea had a massive splash this offseason, the extension to UC Saros. How is that all going to work with the roster that they've assembled? I'm very curious about how that works out for that team.
Yeah.
I'd have another possibility.
I was going to say, huge team to watch. I just don't know what we're really going to learn in training camp from them. You know what I mean? Like, we won't be able to measure the success of anything in camp. I mean, I guess we'll start to get a feel for what it looks and feels like, who some of those players play with, how they've maybe center their power play around, having Stamkos or whatever, like those types of things. But we're not going to know if it works until 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months from now, really. And that's where the exercise gets hard. Maybe I was like too fine-toothing, but I'm like, what are we going to learn in the next 3 weeks? Because essentially that's what we're talking about with training camp storylines. But I think they're a massive storyline for this season. And I'll tell you that Stamkos, I don't want to ruin my whole list, but he appears pretty high on that list I just mentioned as well.
One other team that we have not mentioned at all, it'll be the first ever training camp for the Utah Hockey Club.
Go Yeti.
That's we kind of differ on that, but like,
no, it just seems like there's a lot of spoilers out there that Yeti's going to be the name when it gets to year 2.
I mean, the GM damn near said it at the draft.
I saw Clayton Keller had a quote recently too, where he's like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Yeti. No one's really told me, but I think that's what it is." So, I mean,
you gotta live with it. But there will be NHL hockey in Utah this year. The fact that situation flipped on its head as quickly as it did for Arizona to Utah, and now we'll get to see Utah Hockey Club be a thing for the 24-25 season. Exciting times in Salt Lake City.
Exciting. I'll be curious to see what the reception is to the arena. Obviously the Delta Center is not a ideal venue for NHL hockey. I think they're doing what they can and they plan to renovate it. And obviously they do plan ultimately to build a new arena for the team, but some of this will be imperfect, just because of the nature of the situation. So I'll be curious about that. And, they're playing at some elevation there in Salt Lake City. Maybe that'll be like a new Denver 2.0 or Calgary 3.0. I do always know when I come to Calgary, Julian, and I take a jog along the Bow River, I find it a little harder to breathe when I'm there. So you probably don't notice it when you live there, because I'm assuming you get accustomed to it. But
yeah,
when you fly in, and I know it's nowhere near as high as Denver. I mean, Denver is like, get me the oxygen tank when I go for a jog there. But anyway, I'm getting off topic, but you're right. That's another big story. And I guess in camp, it's not really about a training camp battle or a player. It's just more, how does this look and feel, seeing them as a team in a new place? How comfortable is everyone? And then, as I said, getting settled into a building that isn't yet ideal, but I know they're working on.
I love how this segment went from 5 training camp storylines to 4 and a bunch of thoughts sorry, not thoughts, because that's taken. Pensées elsewhere.
Notes.
Trying not to,
news and notes.
I'm not trying to get in trouble with Kyle and Elliott. I'm not trying to get in trouble with those two.
No, I think we're good with them.
Yes. But yeah, I think unless we're cool with leaving it
that
at
went
that.
better than I thought it was going to.
I think it went way better than I thought it was going to. You're brilliant as always.
No, but when you suggested yesterday, I was like, it's not a bad idea, but I just don't know if I have anything to say. And here we are this deep in, and we got there. So
you always have something to say.
We landed the plane, buddy.
We did as well as we could. I'm glad we also touched on James Van Riemsdyk signing in Columbus. I don't know if you had anything more to add on that front, but also I just think of Don Waddell saying we're at least 2 forwards short right now, and that makes you think, okay, is James Van Riemsdyk is like, who else could be a possibility for that team entering training camp this week?
Well, I don't know that they feel they have to decide it all right now. I mean, expect to see maybe more PTOs there. But the truth of the matter is, especially some of the stronger teams, they do have a squeeze when they're getting down to their roster for opening night. And so I think Columbus is open to maybe claiming a player or players off waivers, keeping up trade discussions in case there's something that makes sense on that front. So I don't know that they have to act this second. I've seen lots of people yelling about Phil Kessel. I don't know if they view Phil Kessel as a true option there. But, what's interesting about Kessel is, he does want to play still. But, after not playing all of last year, I know he was in Vancouver for a time on a PTO with the Canucks before ultimately not signing. A lot of people have a lot of love for Phil Kessel out there, and he hasn't at least put the rest in his own mind, the possibility of still playing. But it's going to be hard for him to get a job somewhere. It would be a pretty interesting storyline in itself if even if he just goes as a tryout somewhere. I mean, Nikolai Kulemin, after 6 years in Russia, got one in Ottawa. So, I mean, Phil Kessel's not that far removed from his last NHL game, and we'll see if he can at least get the chance to fight for a job somewhere.
So you have a name for the teenagers who try to make NHL rosters. What do you call guys like Nikolai Kulemin? And we can lump in Phil Kessel even if he hasn't signed a PTO. What would you call like I don't want to call them the old heads, but like what would you call the older players who are trying to make rosters? Max Pacioretty sort of counts. He's like 35.
Yeah. I guess they're kind of like, I just have to think of a clever way to say it, but they're like the guys who don't want the dream to die, right? Is like they want to, they're like they're still fighting for their dream, but I just don't have I need like a quick little. But I think something playing on that idea is like that actually is the cool part about it. You go to training camp, you might not realize players on a PTO, they're not paid at all. They get put up in a hotel and they get per diem like every other player in the league does, basically to cover their meals and other expenses. And then they're just fighting for a job. They're just playing and trying to get noticed, whether that's by the team that they're on the tryout with or another team. Weirdly, some cases they might almost be hoping for an injury or for something that maybe creates a path to a roster spot for them. And in like if that ends up being Phil Kessel, for example, I mean, we're talking about a guy who's won 3 Stanley Cups, who's the all-time games played leader, who's made X number of millions over his career. He's represented his country on every possible level. Like he's someone who really doesn't certainly have anything to achieve, but he just loves to play and he wants to keep playing. At least I guess where Max Pacioretty or James Van Riemsdyk or some of these other guys that we do know will be with teams, both of those players are still looking for their Stanley Cup. And so I think that that's probably one of the things that helps them get through the long season and maybe get through, more importantly, a summer of training to put themselves in a position with their bodies to be able to still play. But I think there's something romantic about, the players that don't want to just let it go, that want to keep doing what they do. And, I saw it firsthand years ago when Jason Spezza came to Toronto and played a couple of years really as a fourth liner. I mean, we're talking about a former, top pick in the NHL draft who, had 90-point seasons and was an offensive star for a lot of years of his career. And by the end, he was still willing to grind it out and play minimal shifts and occasionally even fight, which is obviously not part of what he did throughout his career, but just anything, he tried to squeeze absolutely everything he could out of his career. And so, lots of examples of those guys around the league over the years, but I kind of, maybe because of my own age and I've sort of some cases covered these guys for so long, I'm always kind of rooting for them to find a way to keep the dream going for one more year.
Do you remember who went number 1 the year Jason Spezza got drafted?
Let me think of the year. Was it Kovalchuk?
You got that right on the money.
Spezza was 2, right?
Spezza was number 2 in the 2001 NHL entry draft. Kovalchuk, Spezza, and I don't know if you remember this guy, Alexander Svitov.
Oh yeah,
went number
Columbus
3 to Tampa Bay.
Oh,
Tampa Bay. Columbus drafted Pascal Leclerc that year. My commissaire was also. Anyway, we don't need to rehash the 01 draft. My bad. Sorry, I'm just
impressed. I'm in mid-season form. I don't need training camp if I can nail Kovalchuk. Yeah, like that was a trivia question out of nowhere.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's why we do preseason. That's why we do the throwaway episodes, CJ, to prepare us for moments like this.
All right.
Anyway, let's get to ask CJ. This first question that I added here, I just want to say I added this question before the results of yesterday's Cowboys game.
Okay.
Insider J Money asks, "Hey Chris, why are the Cowboys never going to win a Super Bowl ever again? Hashtag J Money Curse.
Because we can't have good things. Because only one team wins every year. Which is something
I thought you would have pushed back on that. I thought you would have been like, no, like, screw you.
No, I'm definitely with the Cowboys. Like, I can't say I enjoyed the Sunday game. I mean, when the Saints had 35 points at half, it was a pretty miserable. Like, it was clear from an early part of that game it was not going to go well, and that there was no path back. I still stayed with it till the end. But I'm almost more comfortable when the Cowboys are playing like that. Like, the idea of them ever winning anything that really matters is kind of beyond my comprehension. So, like, oddly, like, you should have saw my text I got yesterday. Friggin' O-Dog is just like in my grill. Just loves rubbing it up. But I almost want to say to him, like, I don't think he believes me. I'm like, oh, trust me. This is like the normal feeling. Like, I'm used to being disappointed by them. Like, this just feels like, yeah, the world's going to spin. I got to wake up. Tomorrow's Monday morning. Everything's fine. It's if they ever started a year like 8-0, I would be living in fear. So I don't have one good answer. I think it's a hard league to win in. I kind of feel like it's inevitable that Bill Belichick's going to come coach the team at some point.
Bill Belichick, coach of the Cowboys. You're all in on that train.
I just kind of feel like it's like two forces that can't escape each other, just like just gradually coming together. And the current head coach is not signed beyond the season, so read into that what you will. Anyway, I don't have a good answer for why they're cursed, because they're always pretty good, usually. Like, they're usually like not awful. And then you get to the games that matter, and you know that you're going to need an extra cold beverage to get through that Sunday.
Better. Would you rather be a fan of another team? You could be a Jets fan. I've been used to disappointment all my life.
You can't, when you're like a real fan with like decades, like it was actually funny. I was texting yesterday with David Alter. He's a big Lions fan, and he was saying he was going to.
Yes, he is.
But he was saying he might go to the Lions-Cowboys game. And I was like, I went to a Lions-Cowboys game at Ford Field, and I remember how disappointed I was. Because the Cowboys lost in the last play of the game. And then he's like, when was that? And I started Googling, and I found it. And it was a game in 2013. Calvin Johnson had a ridiculous game for Detroit. Anyway, the point is, when you have like decades in with a team, I can't imagine wanting to cheer for another team. So anyway.
I know I tried to quit the Jets at one point, and I just got roped back in once they got guys like Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson. You're right. It's very difficult. And
because it's only sweeter if they ever do win.
You're right. Like, you could be like, hey, I've been with this team through and through. We're actually on the up. Like, it feels good. You're not a fake fan.
Yeah. Like, one day I'll be like, I was watching Jose Barrios pitch the game of his life in the playoffs, and
his manager didn't pull him.
No, but I'm going to be like, and then they ruined that season. All the hours put in. Anyway, let's go on.
Welcome to the fan suffering hour with CJ and Julian. This one from Gav0023. I love how, I'll just read the question. When you guys are doing a TV spot over the phone, do you guys get a say in which headshot photo they use, and how often does it get changed?
No, I've never had a say in that. So I don't know. I don't even know who would decide that.
Probably some producer somewhere. But yeah, the answer is no. We've both done that before. But yeah, I've never had a say, even for podcasts and stuff like that. Rarely do I get a say on what photo gets used. I just presume whoever's running the show just goes on our bios, probably at work, and then just lifts the photo and uses it.
And my original photo, it's no longer associated with this podcast. That was from the pod, though. It was taken by Jesse Blake. He like came over to like my neighborhood, and I remember doing like a little photo shoot with him in the park.
Those were sick photos, though. That was a fun era. It was a cool.
It didn't last too long, that photo as part of the art. But anyway, I'm with you. I kind of try to do my job, like to simplify things. Like, our job is to try to do the best we can when the record button's on, and I'll trust the marketing to the marketers.
Okay, this next question. This might get put in the pantheon of weird CJ show questions.
Oh, no.
This is from Dakota. What NHL player would you name your cat after? Presuming, I mean, you don't have pets as far as I know. I don't have pets, but if we had a cat, which NHL player would you name your cat after? They also write, I've done Bobby Lou for my cats. My parents have done Subi for one of their cats. So I ask both of you, what would you name your cat if it had to be based on an NHL player?
Felix Potman.
Ooh, that's easy because his nickname was the cat.
I'm sticking with it.
You know what? Nate Mac or Mac? Yeah, Mac. Mac. I mean, it's close to my name. McKinnon. It could be McKenzie Weir, but
yeah, but McKinnon should be a dog because they call him Nate Dog.
Yeah, that's fair.
Although maybe there's a touch of irony in there if you're like playing off that and calling your cat. Then it could be true. You're being witty. Whereas I'm literally just taking the player was known as the cat.
This is my cat, Nate Dog. I like that one. Steve D29. How far does Chris run a day to consider it a successful run? Like a pitcher needs 5+ innings for a quality start. What's his minimum distance?
7K is my normal minimum. I try to run 40 minutes a day, so that falls between 7 and 8K generally at my pace. So, there's been a couple times, very, very select times that I've been shorter than that. But in general, 7K is kind of the base.
Okay. Continuing with running questions, we have an in-house question from Nick Barden from the SDPN. What time does CJ expect to finish with in the marathon coming up in October?
Thank you for asking, Nick. It's funny because I posted on the weekend, anyone who follows me on IG, on my story, because I was doing a long run on Saturday morning and there was a nice sunrise and I was looking for an excuse to use the photo. And some people got confused because the official tag for the race I'm running, the TSC Toronto Waterfront Marathon and Half Marathon, has 42K in it. So I think people thought I was saying I was doing the marathon. I am doing the half marathon, which is 21K, which is very different. Having done both many times, 42K is twice the distance of the half and at least 4 times the work to get ready to run it. So much respect to any of you that are listeners that might be training for a full marathon in the fall, because I know right now you are in it up to your eyeballs running like 3-hour training runs on a Saturday. Whereas I'm doing like a nice, like 1 hour, 20-minute training run and thinking like, wow, that was a big effort for me. So, what time? Honestly, Nick, I don't know. Probably around 150 for my halftime at this point in time. I must say I'm a little slower than I've been in years gone by. I think I did that race in 143 or 144 2 years ago. But I'm not that. The one beauty about doing lots of races over lots of years is I'm not as hung up on the time. I'm just excited to kind of like try to get in the best shape I can and do it as best I can. And no matter what happens, I'm going to go out for a nice brunch and have a couple beers and an afternoon nap after. So
nice.
If it's 150 or 155 or 147, it's not going to change my life.
Don't forget, everyone, this man has over 1,600 days, a streak going. I was almost going to say experience. It obviously it probably goes beyond that, but like 1,600 consecutive days of running. Like, you're built for this.
1,602. I'm built for it, but I'll say this: like when you're going to do a distance race, because 7K is, as I said, was what I do most days. I haven't been running longer runs too often, so I've had to sort of scale it up here a little bit in August and September. So as much as like, okay, I'm in shape enough to do it, I'm not really in great race shape. It's hard to explain the difference. I mean, but I had to run 17K on Saturday, and that was real.
Damn. How was that?
It's fun. I mean, honestly, I like it for these periods because it's like a period where I focus on it. Makes me go to bed earlier that Friday night because I'm getting up to do it early in the morning. Feel really satisfied. I'm back home at like 9:30 in the morning with 17K under my belt. I'm like, this is awesome. But I would obviously, some people do this, Julian, like not like I'm like the average Joe, the most average Joe. Like some people are doing this every weekend all year round and they're animals. Like I saw some people out there on Saturday morning, like you should see, and they're also average Joes and Janes. And then I presume they all have day jobs. Like they're not professional runners, but like They are fast and just out there just killing it every Saturday morning. I mean, respect.
Man. I can't, like, I like running when I play a sport. I don't like the idea of like running like a block or like 5K. I like walks. I've been doing a lot more like just walking around my neighborhood and just getting steps in. But like, I don't like the idea of just trying to like just run for like an hour and a half or whatever.
Do you know what?
I don't know.
It gets in your blood though when you do it. I was once you, and then now look at me.
Running changes you. Yeah.
More than one person
question.
there, I bet, is nodding at that though.
Yes.
I'm just saying, like, I never thought I'd be doing this. I don't really know. I got dragged into my very first race a long time ago, and then it's been in my blood somehow. So, you know, I'm just saying, don't ever say ever. You might not like it today, but maybe if you ever tried it, you might get addicted. If
I try it, if I go for a run one day, I will let you know, and I'll let you know how I feel.
Okay. The first day is never going to feel good.
But
to be honest, the first month probably wouldn't feel good.
No, but you know, maybe it's I don't know. Could be a distinct change in my lifestyle. Who knows?
I'm not suggesting you need one, man.
One for you.
Just to be clear.
No. I wasn't taking that as that. No, we don't do that. Last one. And actually, now that I think about it, this might actually be the weirdest one of all of them.
Oh no.
From Jenna. In the spirit of causing chaos, you know this is going to be good when they start this way. What is the funniest possible thing that your team could do this season? As an example, they wrote as an example, they're a Sharks fan. They have a Cody. They're thinking Cody Ceci could win the Norris and sweep the St. Louis Blues again, which I don't know when the last time that's happened for the Sharks team. But the idea of Cody Ceci being up for a Norris is hilarious. But that's the point. Think of the funniest possible thing that could happen. I would say, I mean, they're the team I cover, but the funniest thing that would happen to the Calgary Flames is if they made the playoffs. You go through the last two seasons where they had teams where they thought were built to make the playoffs, and they don't make the playoffs. And then they don't do that much in the offseason. It should be all about the youth this year and rebuilding. And if this team makes the playoffs, oh, that would be really funny, especially since a lot of people are looking at them and are saying, like, yeah, they're not going to make the playoffs. They're going to be pretty low down the standings. No one's going to believe in them. But if they find a way to play above themselves and they play like a playoff team, I think that's actually going to be hilarious. Not just the fact that, oh, they beat the odds and all that, but fans have been clamoring for this team to do exactly what they're doing right now. And if they make the playoffs, it's like really? Like, you couldn't have done this like 2 years ago? Like, that's what I think would happen. That's what I think would be the funniest thing. Calgary Flames making the playoffs. I don't think they'll make the playoffs, but that would be funny.
I think a Blues-Oilers series could be delicious after the offer sheets.
Absolutely.
I don't know if that'd be funny, but there would be some... I don't even know if that would be chaos, but there'd be some degree of chaos around that.
It's a built-in storyline.
Yeah, so maybe that doesn't satisfy... Because, like, I'm hung up on that first sentence, like, in the spirit of ultimate chaos or whatever it was.
Actually, you know what? I have one. I have one for the Leafs. Mitch Marner career season. Mitch Marner going through the offseason that he went through where it looked as if he was going to leave. So many fans wanted him gone. People were getting mad at T-shirts he was wearing in the summer about how the shirts that say, like, oh, watch me disappear or whatever. It's like, oh, like, how could you wear these shirts? Don't you understand your public persona and presence? How could you wear that? Could you imagine if Mitch Marner, after all that he went through this offseason, has the greatest possible season he could have, and it's just this big redemption year?
The thing is, I can imagine that. I don't think that's crazy.
I don't know. I don't think it has to be crazy. It just has to be funny. And I think that would just be funny.
Well, it'd be pretty funny for his accountant.
It'd be hilarious for his accountant.
It would be the right time to have that happen.
Darren Ferris would be laughing all the way to the bank.
Yes. I mean, I'm sure they're going to do well no matter what the season looks like. But if it ends up being his greatest ever season, that'd be a pretty good one.
I mean, you know better than me. I'm going off of what I see as an outsider. But I think that would be really funny. But then again, maybe some people would be like, oh, well, he's always good in the regular season. He has to do it in the playoffs. Maybe it extends to the playoffs. Maybe this is the year where Mitch Marner is not the problem in the playoffs.
I mean, that would be chaos, as if like Mitch Marner had like a Conn Smythe playoffs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that
playoff MVP level.
That would,
like, even if they don't win, like in playoff MVP level and everyone shuts up.
Well, but it would also satisfy the chaos button, because he might still be unsigned at that point in time. And it's like, then what do they do? And what does he do?
You're like,
and does he want to leave?
Man.
Anyway, when you actually talk about chaos, Mitch Marner, like massive playoff performance with at least some success for the team. That's actually,
you have to add playoffs.
That's maximum chaos.
Yeah. At that point, anyone who wrestled with their feelings of Mitch Marner and wanting him off the team, what do you do at that point when he is balling out in a Game 7 of the Stanley Cup playoffs? What do you do?
Maybe chaos will be like Samuel Montembeault leading Canada to the Four Nations tournament win, or someone, because, you know, everyone's expecting like the goaltending for Canada to be an issue. But imagine, like, I don't know if it's Jordan Binnington or Montembeault or Aiden Hill or whoever it ends up being like the goalie of the tournament.
He looks like a dark horse for that Canada team.
For sure.
Sam Montembeault. Absolutely. He has the experience at the Worlds. I thought he was just going to be a journeyman guy, but he's carved out a home for himself in Montreal. I mean, maybe that happens.
From waiver claim to Team Canada's #1 goaltender.
Pretty great. That's a fun story. That'd be pretty cool to follow. Yeah. I think we answered that question as best as we could, Jenna. And thank you to everyone else who sent in questions for Ask CJ. I believe that's going to do it for our Monday edition of our great and fair and amazing show.
Thanks for
You did well.
Thanks, buddy. I mean, it's a Monday. Big week, though. I'm getting ready.
Big week, though. Big week across the National Hockey League, especially for us as reporters in our field. We'll be back later this week with another episode. Subscribe to the podcast. Subscribe to all the other podcasts on the SDPN, including the Steve Dangle podcast. They really need your support. They really need it.
Small show you might have heard of, SDP.
Yeah. They just need all the attention that they could get. Anyways, thanks, guys. Peace.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.